Welcome to the Introduction to Economics from Park Bench Tutors. This brief presentation is brought to you by David Hopcroft. This podcast introduces some simple ideas about production. If you have studied accounting, then you will already be familiar with some of these ideas. If we consider what people want, then we are almost certain to find that wants exceed the resources available. Production is the creation of wealth which adds to the welfare of society. However, since there are limited resources, production needs to be efficient to try and gain maximum benefit in terms of welfare. In our first podcast, we considered the decisions that are made in economics. What should we produce? How will we do this? And who production is to be for? The possibilities for production depend upon the type of economy in the country being considered. In the former Soviet Union, and in a few socialist countries, the decisions are taken by the government. Resource allocation and price control are determined by a central agency. This is often called a command economy. Most economies are mixed economies. Some decisions are taken at government level, but the vast majority are taken by individual firms that operate in this market economy. The production unit in economics is called a firm. This is a decision-making unit. It takes the decisions that we referred to earlier. As a production unit, it will transform resources into either goods or services. These products will be purchased by the consumers, which may include the government or other firms. An early idea in economics was that the objective of all firms was to maximize profits, but that is now considered too narrow. There are several interested parties whose objectives may not always be the same. A stockholder is interested in getting a good return for an investment. This means the payment of dividends. However, if all profit were paid out as dividends, then the firm could not invest. The managers of a firm may have other objectives: to increase sales and to invest in plant and equipment to increase production. Most large corporations are under the control of a board of directors, who may be seeking to balance these two interests, or who could be seeking to expand the firm by taking over other firms. In deciding how much to produce, the firm must consider the market and the place of the firm in that market. In a highly competitive market, then the price for goods needs to be in line with competitors. If it is too high, then the goods are not likely to sell. Currently, competition exists in many areas where electronic goods are produced, such as mobile phones and computers. Sometimes the market is dominated by a small number of firms. There are only two main operating systems being used on most computers that are sold, either Microsoft Windows or Apple. These tend to dominate the market, although open source systems are increasing and presenting a very different challenge. In the United Kingdom there are very few banks, and those few major banks dominate the market. Following the heavy losses made by speculation, there are now fewer banks in the United States, creating a situation that is often called an oligopoly. If only one firm dominates and provides a particular good or service, then it is called a monopoly. The postal service in the United Kingdom used to be a monopoly, and with very limited competition can still be considered to be a monopoly. In the United States there are examples of local monopolies. In Jacksonville, in Florida, there is a single supplier of electricity and water. Since there is no alternative provider, then the firm, JEA, has a monopoly. Firms are classed according to the legal definitions of their ownership. The most common form of ownership is that of a sole proprietor. They do not employ many people compared to corporations. The advantages are that the owner gets to keep all the profits, can take decisions quickly, and respond to market changes quickly. The disadvantages include having limited resources available for expansion and having unlimited liability. This last point means that all the assets of the owner, such as their house and car, are at risk if the firm is unable to pay its debts. In other words, there is no legal distinction between the business and the owner. When Britain used to be described as a nation of shopkeepers, it referred to the large number of sole proprietors trading on the high streets. A partnership is very similar to a sole provider, but there can be from 2 to 20 partners. There are advantages in having more finance available, and different partners can specialize to look after different aspects of the business. The main disadvantage is that there is still no legal distinction between the business and the assets of a partner. There is still unlimited liability, and all partners can be liable for debts even if they were incurred by the actions of only one partner. Common examples of partnerships include doctors, dentists, and lawyers or solicitors. The question of unlimited liability prevented many businesses from developing growth and expanding because of the risks involved. It also made it difficult to obtain finance easily. This was addressed in the 19th century when stockholding firms were formed. The stockholder has a financial investment in the stock or shares of a company. The stockholding company has to produce and file annual reports. The accounting reports that must be filed are the balance sheet, income statement, statement of stockholders' equity, and the statement of cash flow. In the United Kingdom, these reports are subject to the requirements of international accounting standards. In the United States, they are subject to generally accepted accounting principles. The simplest form of stockholding company is a private limited company. Such a company must be registered and the reports filed each year. The liability of each stockholder is limited to the value of their investment. Personal assets are not at risk. With a private limited company, the stock or shares cannot be sold to the public, and there must be at least 2 stockholders. The term limited refers to the limited liability of the stockholders. A public limited company may offer stock for sale to the general public. There is no limit to the number of stockholders. There must be an annual meeting where stockholders have a right to be able to change the articles for a company, change directors, and agree to payments of dividends. In reality, such meetings are poorly attended, and most of the time the board of directors make recommendations that are passed without discussion. Public companies represent only a small percentage of all companies, less than 10%, but they do employ a large majority of the workforce and a large amount, in excess of 60%, of all capital employed in firms. The idea of a cooperative in England dates back to 1844, when the Rochdale Cooperative Society was first formed. A group of consumers or producers come together to own and control the business. Producer cooperatives are more common in other European Union countries. There are some firms or corporations that are government-owned or government-controlled. These are referred to as public corporations. The United Kingdom went through a stage after 1945 when many activities were taken into public ownership. The common name being employed at the time was nationalisation. The idea was that the government would appoint the board of directors and a minister would have oversight of the corporation. The British Broadcasting Corporation, the BBC, still remains as a public corporation, whilst others have been returned to private ownership in a process we call privatisation. There are mixed views on the success and desirability of public ownership. In the United Kingdom, there is general agreement on the benefits of a national health service, where most hospitals are effectively under government control. The privatisation of telephone communications and the introduction of more competition has generally been viewed as desirable. On the other hand, when the rail service came under public ownership, the investment was misguided, many steam locomotives being built at a time when diesel and electric engines were being introduced into other countries. Large numbers of these steam engines were eventually scrapped. For wants to be satisfied, growth is required to increase production. However, growth of firms can take place in a number of ways. Sometimes the aim of growth is to increase profit. At other times, the aim may simply be to ensure survival and take over competitors or use economies of scale to gain an advantage. Growth may also occur by diversification. Tobacco companies, faced with large amounts of capital but also having a product whose sales were going to fall because of the increased awareness of health risks, decided in many cases to diversify. Imperial Tobacco changed their name to the Imperial Group and became involved with textiles. There are various ways in which a firm can expand, but they fall into one of two types. Either a business expands internally, or a business expands by joining with other firms. Joining with other firms can be through a merger or a takeover. The takeover of a firm that is involved in the same industry but at a different stage of production is referred to as vertical integration. If a firm takes over another that is involved with an earlier stage of production, this is called vertical integration backward. This may well reduce the cost of raw materials or partially completed materials, and may also ensure the supply of those materials. It may also mean that the firm can control the supply of a component and reduce access to that component by competitors. If a firm takes over another that is involved with a later stage of production, this is called vertical integration forward. This might help ensure there is better marketing of the final product. It can also mean that the firm gets a greater share of the profit. Horizontal integration takes place when one firm takes over another that is involved in the same stage of production. This might be to achieve economies of scale or to have a greater control over the market by gaining an increased market share. Where the aim is for economies of scale, there can be problems if it proves necessary to close some plants. It is becoming increasingly common for firms to acquire others whose activities are not related. This was mentioned for the Imperial Group. British American Tobacco took over two insurance companies, Eagle Star and Hambro Life, in the 1980s. This is another example of a need to diversify. Other conglomerates have different objectives, and the practice of taking over a failing firm at low cost in order to sell off parts, which is referred to as asset stripping, has come under criticism. Where one firm effectively controls the output of another, the term quasi-integration is used. The most common form of this, which is seen, is the selling off of franchises. In this case, the controlling firm can determine that its own products will receive priority. Gas companies may do this in order to ensure that their brand of gas is sold at the filling station. For the purpose of illustration and measurement, which we shall consider further in our next podcast, economists consider there are three inputs to production. These are land, labour and capital. In this case, land refers to natural resources, labour includes both the physical and mental effort required, and capital refers to any goods that will assist in the production of goods or services for the future. Sometimes the distinction is not entirely clear. Land can mean minerals, vegetation and other resources. Where land was reclaimed from the sea, as in parts of the Netherlands, it can be argued this represents both land and capital. The labour force includes those aged between 16 and 65 years of age in the United Kingdom. The upper age is slowly being raised, although not all are available since some are bringing up a family whilst others may be in full-time education. Labour is not homogeneous, meaning that there are differences in the skills required to be a worker at a restaurant or gas station and those required to be a nurse or an accountant. Accounting students will recognize that capital here refers to assets such as buildings, plant and equipment, and stocks of resources. Enterprise relates to entrepreneurs, though with more large firms the role is often taken by labour employed in research and development. Even so, entrepreneurs can be important in opening up new markets, as was the case with Ryanair and EasyJet, who were very effective in introducing low-cost or budget airlines. Finally, in this podcast, we distinguish between short-run and long-run. If any of the three factors mentioned, land, labour and capital, cannot be varied within a particular period of time, then this is referred to as a short run. If all of the factors of production can be varied, then the period of time is referred to as the long run. This ends the first podcast on production, brought to you by David Hopcroft of Park Bench Tutors. Thank you for watching and listening, and good luck with your studies.